The first warning came not from headquarters, but from the enemy. Captured German reports, battlefield interrogations, and post-war memoirs repeated the same observation in different words. American airborne troops did not behave like ordinary infantry. They continued fighting after being surrounded. They counterattacked when logic suggested they should conserve strength. Individual positions often resisted long after neighboring units had been forced back. To German officers trained in operational warfare, that behavior disrupted every calculation. The Battle of Bastogne was never simply about one Belgian town. It became a collision between two military philosophies. The German army entered the Ardennes believing that momentum was everything. For nearly 6 years, German operational doctrine had revolved around speed, concentration, and psychological collapse. Armor punched through weak points. Infantry followed. Artillery isolated defenders. Confusion spread faster than bullets. Once the enemy believed the battle was lost, the battle usually was. This method had destroyed Poland in weeks. Even during the brutal campaigns against the Soviet Union, local breakthroughs often depended as much upon collapsing morale as overwhelming firepower. Bastogne refused to follow that pattern. The crossroads remained in American hands long enough for every hour of delay to become another hour lost for Hitler's timetable. Every fuel convoy forced onto secondary roads burned precious gasoline. Every stalled panzer column consumed supplies that Germany could no longer replace. Every failed assault cost experienced crews whose replacements scarcely existed. By late December, time itself had become Germany's enemy. The weather changed first. On 23 December, after nearly a week of heavy cloud, the skies over the Ardennes suddenly cleared. Instead of silence came the deep drone of transport aircraft. C-47 sky trains crossed above Bastogne in long formations. Bundles wrapped in colored parachutes drifted toward the snow-covered fields. Food radio batteries. Small arms ammunition. Many bundles landed inside American lines. Some drifted into German positions. Others shattered on frozen ground. But enough arrived to transform the siege. P-47 Thunderbolts, grounded for days by weather, now attacked German columns moving along narrow forest roads. Trucks burned. Fuel tankers exploded. Bridges became bottlenecks. German commanders suddenly found themselves fighting not only the defenders inside Bastogne, but American aircraft above every exposed road. The offensive slowed again. Inside Bastogne, however, conditions remained desperate. The wounded continued filling improvised aid stations. Churches became hospitals. School buildings became operating rooms. Basements became wards where surgeons worked under lantern light. Medical officers later recalled shortages of plasma, anesthetics, blankets, and surgical instruments. Some operations proceeded while artillery shells burst only yards away. Many soldiers survived wounds that would have been fatal only because medics refused to stop working. Others could not be saved. Frozen ground complicated every burial. General Anthony Mikolev never pretended the situation was comfortable. His famous reply nuts had become legendary almost immediately, but the reality behind the joke remained grim. Every commander on the perimeter understood the numbers. German forces surrounding Bastogne still outnumbered the defenders. Armor remained a constant threat. Artillery ammunition, although replenished, still had to be rationed carefully. No one believed victory had already been secured. The objective remained exactly what it had been since the first trucks arrived. Hold nothing more, nothing less. Meanwhile, nearly 100 kilometers to the south, another headquarters worked around the clock. General George S. Patton had already begun one of the most remarkable operational pivots of the war. His Third Army had been driving east. Entire corps changed direction across icy roads. Fuel dumps were relocated. Bridges were reassigned. Traffic officers redirected thousands of vehicles moving through winter storms. Military historians have long noted that such a maneuver required months of planning under normal circumstances. The advance was anything but easy. German resistance stiffened with every mile northward. Roads clogged with refugees, damaged vehicles, and snow delayed movement. Engineers worked continuously clearing routes. Tank crews slept inside freezing vehicles. Infantry marched through forests where visibility rarely extended beyond a few dozen meters. Every hour counted. Inside Bastogne, every hour without relief meant additional casualties. On 26 December, the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division finally reached the southern approaches. Near the village of Assinois, American tanks smashed through German blocking positions. Late that afternoon, the first armored vehicles entered the perimeter. The corridor they opened remained narrow and vulnerable. German artillery continued shelling it. Counterattacks repeatedly attempted to close it. But the siege had been broken. Supplies could move. Casualties could leave. Bastogne had survived. Survival, however, did not mean the battle had ended. Far from it. The fighting around Bastogne continued well into January 1945. German commanders remained convinced that eliminating the Bastogne salient offered their last realistic opportunity to restore momentum. Fresh formations entered the battle. Among them were Waffen-SS divisions whose reputations had been forged on the Eastern Front. These units possessed experienced officers, veteran tank crews, and considerable combat experience. They also inherited a problem the regular Wehrmacht had failed to solve. The crossroads remained American. By now, exhaustion affected everyone. American paratroopers had been fighting continuously for weeks. Replacement soldiers often entered foxholes, beside veterans they had never met. German infantry companies sometimes attacked at half their authorized strength. Panzer battalions increasingly reported more operational vehicles lost to mechanical failure and fuel shortages than enemy fire. The Ardennes offensive had consumed resources Germany could no longer replenish. Oil production had collapsed under Allied bombing. Railroads struggled to deliver replacements. The Luftwaffe, once capable of dominating European skies, now appeared only sporadically. Every failed assault deepened those shortages. German after-action reports reveal a growing frustration. Attacks frequently achieved initial penetration. American positions would be forced back. Individual strong points fell. Then, often after nightfall, counterattacks restored the line. Again and again, German commanders found themselves capturing terrain that could not be held. Every local success dissolved before becoming operational success. It was precisely the opposite of blitzkrieg. Instead of breakthroughs producing rapid exploitation, every breakthrough became another isolated firefight. Without rhythm, German doctrine lost much of its effectiveness. Military historians sometimes focus on weapons. The bazooka, American artillery, German Panthers and Tigers. Yet participants from both sides repeatedly emphasized something less tangible: unit cohesion. The 101st Airborne had trained from its inception to operate while scattered. Training assumed confusion. Small groups learned to organize independently. Junior officers expected to command above their rank. Sergeants assumed responsibilities normally reserved for lieutenants. Individual soldiers became accustomed to making decisions without waiting for orders. That culture mattered enormously at Bastogne. Communication lines were frequently severed. Command posts moved. Telephone wires froze or were cut by shell fire. Yet the defense continued functioning. Not perfectly. German commanders expecting centralized collapse instead encountered decentralized resistance. Destroying one headquarters rarely stopped nearby units from fighting. This characteristic had already appeared in Normandy. On D-Day, many airborne sticks landed miles from their designated drop zones. Improvised groups formed almost immediately. Objectives originally assigned to companies were sometimes accomplished by a handful of scattered soldiers who happened to find one another. Market garden reinforced those lessons. By December 1944, Surviving veterans had already experienced major airborne campaigns before arriving at Bastogne. Their confidence rested less on optimism than experience. They had already survived situations that conventional doctrine considered disastrous. After the war, historians occasionally exaggerated German admiration into dramatic quotations unsupported by evidence. Stories circulated claiming SS officers described American paratroopers as supermen or impossible to defeat. Most of those quotations cannot be verified. The authentic record is subtler. German operational reports consistently acknowledged unusually determined resistance. Senior commanders including Hasso von Manteuffel later recognized that Bastogne disrupted the timetable of the Ardennes offensive. Other officers emphasize how repeated delays around the crossroads complicated movement, exhausted armored formations, and contributed to the failure of the larger operation. Professional respect appears throughout those accounts. Mythology is largely a later addition. Ironically, the genuine record requires no embellishment. A division originally intended as strategic reserve was rushed into battle with incomplete equipment, inadequate winter clothing, and little preparation. It held one of the most important road junctions in Europe against repeated attacks by experienced German formations. It remained surrounded for nearly a week. By January 1945, the Ardennes offensive had effectively failed. German casualties exceeded anything the Wehrmacht could realistically replace. Hundreds of tanks and assault guns had been destroyed or abandoned. Fuel stocks were nearly exhausted. Experienced officers disappeared faster than military academies could produce new ones. The initiative on the Western Front passed permanently to the Allies. No comparable German offensive would ever be launched again. One German commander later summarized the campaign with painful simplicity. The offensive, he concluded, had broken the German army in the West. That judgment came not from Allied propaganda, but from German professionals examining the cost afterward. For the men of the 101st Airborne, victory carried little celebration. The division had suffered heavy losses. Hundreds were dead. Thousands had been wounded, missing, or evacuated. Many survivors later admitted that they remembered the cold more vividly than the fighting. Frostbite remained a lifelong injury for many veterans. Some returned to civilian life. Others stayed in uniform. Years later, reunions brought together men who had shared foxholes, without learning one another's full names until after the war. The battered bastards of Bastogne. It was never an official designation. It needed no official approval. Everyone who had been there understood it. Today, visitors walking through Bastogne encounter quiet streets, preserved monuments, museums, and forests that have largely reclaimed the scars of battle. Snow still falls across the Ardennes in winter. The roads still converge, as they did in 1944. Most travelers pass through without realizing that the entire German offensive once depended upon those intersections. The crossroads no longer decide the fate of armies. They simply connect ordinary towns. Yet beneath those roads lies the memory of a battle that demonstrated something both armies eventually recognized. Weapons matter. Numbers matter. Logistics matter. But there are moments in military history when an operation fails, because the assumptions behind it fail. German doctrine assumed that enough pressure would eventually force defenders to yield. Not because the Americans possessed unlimited ammunition. Not because they enjoyed overwhelming superiority. For much of the siege, they possessed neither. They endured because thousands of individual soldiers, trained years earlier to function under isolation and uncertainty, continued doing exactly what they had been taught to do. Hold their ground. Wait for the next attack. Prepare for another. By the time relief finally arrived, the crossroads had become far more than a point on a map. It had become the place where one army discovered that its most successful method of breaking an opponent's will no longer worked. And once that realization settled across the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the outcome of Germany's last great offensive had already been decided.